My name is Julian, and right now, I am standing on the edge of a $6 million infinity pool in Malibu, watching the sunset dip below the Pacific horizon. Most people would look at this view and see a dream, a life of absolute success. But as I feel the salt air on my skin, all I can feel is a cold, hollow betrayal. Behind me, in the sprawling glass and steel villa that I paid for with 10 years of 80-hour work weeks, my family is throwing a party. They are celebrating the wedding of my younger brother, Caleb, to a woman named Sienna, whose family has more old money than they have common sense. But the party isn't the problem. The problem is the heavy manila folder my father, Arthur, just shoved into my chest as he pulled me into the shadows of the balcony. "Sign the deed, Julian," Arthur hissed, his voice trembling not with fear, but with a greedy desperation. "Caleb needs this house. Sienna's family expects him to have a certain status. You've had your fun living here, but it's time to be a team player for once in your selfish life." I looked at my father, a man I've bailed out of debt 3 times in the last 5 years, and I felt a laugh rising in my throat, a dry, bitter thing. "You want me to just hand over my home? To a brother who hasn't held a job since he graduated 3 years ago?" Arthur stepped closer, his face contorting into something I didn't recognize. "This isn't a request. We know about the Project Icarus files, Julian. We know what you did to get that first round of funding for your tech firm. If these documents hit the SEC or the press tomorrow morning, your career isn't just over. You're going to prison. So you have a choice. Sign this villa over to Caleb as a wedding gift tonight, or spend the next 10 years in a federal cell." I stared at the folder. I knew exactly what they thought they had. They thought they had found my shameful secret, the one thing that could bring my empire crumbling down. They thought they had me backed into a corner where I'd have to choose between my house and my freedom. My mother, Eleanor, was standing near the glass doors, watching us with a smug, expectant smile, already mentally redecorating my master suite for Caleb and his new bride. What they didn't know, what they couldn't possibly have imagined, is that I wasn't scared. I was waiting. I had been hiding something far bigger than any fabricated tech scandal. I had a secret that was about to turn their entire world into ash. And as I look at Caleb across the lawn, toasted by his new in-laws, I realized they had no idea that by taking my house, they were actually walking into the most expensive trap ever built. Before I take you back to how my own flesh and blood turned into my worst enemies, and before I show you the exact moment their faces turned pale in front of 100 guests, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Your support allows us to bring these stories of absolute justice to life. Drop a comment below and let me know. Would you ever forgive a family that blackmailed you? Now, let's go back to where the greed first started to rot the Callahan family tree. To anyone looking at the Callahan family from the outside, we looked like the blueprint for the American dream. My father, Arthur, was a small-town businessman who talked a big game about legacy and honor. My mother, Eleanor, was the queen of the local social scene, a woman who valued appearances more than she valued the truth. But inside the walls of our home in San Francisco, the reality was much darker. There was a clear, unspoken rule. I was the resource, and my brother Caleb was the prince. I am 31 years old, and for the last decade, my life has been a relentless grind. When Caleb was off finding himself on a 2-year backpacking trip through Europe, funded entirely by a credit card my parents guilted me into co-signing, I was in a windowless office in Silicon Valley, surviving on lukewarm coffee and 3 hours of sleep. I built my tech firm, Ether Systems, from a garage startup into a multi-million-dollar enterprise. Every success I had was earned through grit, sweat, and a level of stress that has probably taken years off my life. But in my mother's eyes, my hard work was just expected. Whenever I landed a new contract or was featured in a business magazine, she'd offer a dry, "That's nice, Julian. Now, can you talk to your father about his outstanding bridge club fees?" Caleb, on the other hand, is the professional failure of the family. At 28, he has the resume of a ghost. He tried real estate for 3 weeks. He tried influencing for a month. He even tried starting a luxury candle line that I ended up paying the manufacturing costs for, only for him to lose interest when he realized he'd actually have to ship the orders himself. Yet, every time he walked into a room, my parents acted like a war hero had returned. "Caleb has such a creative soul," Eleanor would say, stroking his hair while he sat on their couch, 30 years old and still asking for an allowance. "He's just waiting for the right opportunity. Not everyone can be a cold, calculating machine like you, Julian." A cold, calculating machine. That's what they called me because I asked for receipts. Because I wanted to know why I was paying for Caleb's third BMW lease when I was still driving my first company car. Arthur would always step in with that booming, manipulative voice of his. "Julian, family is a circle. We take from the strong to support the weak. Caleb is your brother. His failure is our failure. Do you want the Callahan name to be associated with a son who can't pay his bills?" So, I paid. I paid for the debts, the failed businesses, and the lavish vacations they took while I stayed behind to handle the quarterly earnings. 2 years ago, I bought the Malibu villa. It was my one indulgence, a $6 million sanctuary of glass and privacy. It was supposed to be my escape. But within weeks of me moving in, my parents had practically colonized the guest wing. Arthur started hosting business meetings there, using my home to pretend he was still a major player in the industry, even though his own company had been hollowed out years ago by his bad investments. I let it happen because I thought, maybe if I gave them enough, they'd finally see me. I thought if I provided the lifestyle they craved, I'd finally earn the seat at the table that Caleb had held since birth, without doing a single day's work. But then, Caleb met Sienna. Sienna comes from one of the oldest, wealthiest families in Pasadena. Her father is a retired senator, and her mother is a socialite who wouldn't be caught dead in a house that costs less than $5 million. When Caleb brought her over to the villa, he didn't introduce her to his brother's home. He walked in like he owned the place. He showed her the infinity pool, the custom wine cellar, and the view of the coastline as if he had been the one who signed the mortgage. My parents were ecstatic. This was the legacy they wanted. Caleb was marrying into a dynasty. But there was a problem. Sienna's family assumed Caleb was the one with the tech fortune. They assumed the villa belonged to the successful younger brother they had heard so much about from Arthur's exaggerated stories. Instead of telling the truth, my parents leaned into the lie. And when the wedding was finally announced, the mask of the loving family slipped completely, revealing the monsters underneath. They didn't just want me to be a guest at the wedding, they wanted me to be the sacrificial lamb. Before we get into the secret meeting where the blackmail first started, please take a second to like this video and subscribe. It helps us share these stories of people who finally had enough. Let me know in the comments. Do you have a golden child in your family who gets everything for doing nothing? Now let's see what happened when my father decided that my home was the perfect wedding gift for my brother. The formal announcement of Caleb's engagement to Sienna Witcher wasn't just a family dinner, it was a production. My mother, Eleanor, had insisted on hosting it at my villa, of course. She spent 3 days ordering around my cleaning staff and a high-end catering team I was paying for, acting as if she were the lady of the manor. Sienna's parents, the Witchers, arrived in a chauffeured Bentley, looking every bit like the old-money Pasadena royalty they were. As I sat at the end of my own mahogany dining table, I felt like a stranger in my own life. Caleb was at the head, holding Sienna's hand, laughing at jokes he didn't understand, and sipping a vintage Bordeaux that cost me $200 a bottle. Sienna's father, Senator Witcher, was a man who spoke in broad strokes about strategic alliances and family foundations. Every time he looked at Caleb, he saw a successful young tech entrepreneur who owned a $6 million piece of Malibu coastline. He didn't see the brother who had slept on my guest room sofa for 6 months because he couldn't afford rent. Halfway through the second course, my father, Arthur, stood up, clinking his crystal glass with a silver spoon. The room went quiet. "Friends," Arthur began, his voice booming with a false pride that made my skin crawl. We are here to celebrate more than just a union of two hearts. We are celebrating the continuation of a legacy. Caleb and Sienna represent the future of the Callahan name. And as they prepare to build their lives together, it is our duty and our joy to ensure they have a foundation worthy of their status. I looked at my mother. She was glowing, her eyes fixed on Sienna's mother. I knew that look. It was the look of a woman who had finally secured the social standing she had been chasing for 30 years. But then Arthur's gaze shifted to me. It wasn't a look of love, it was a command. "Julian," Arthur said, his smile never reaching his eyes. "You've done remarkably well for yourself. You've had the pleasure of this beautiful home for several years. But we all know that a man of Caleb's upcoming responsibilities, a man entering the Wiltshire Circle, needs a residence that reflects his position. Don't you agree?" The table went silent. Sienna looked at me with a tilted head, as if she were waiting for a servant to confirm a delivery. Caleb just smirked, leaning back in his chair, swirling his wine. "I'm not sure what you mean, Dad," I said, my voice low and steady. I knew exactly what he meant, but I wanted him to say it. I wanted him to say it in front of all these people. Arthur's smile twitched. "What I mean, Julian, is that the family has decided. As a wedding gift to your only brother, to the man who will carry our name into the next generation of leadership, you will be transferring the deed of this villa to Caleb. It's a small sacrifice for the sake of the family's future." I felt the air leave the room. Sienna's father nodded approvingly. "A generous move, Julian. Very commendable. It's rare to see such fraternal devotion in this day and age." "I'm sorry," I said, standing up. "Did you just say I'm giving away my house? The house I built? The house I'm still paying the property taxes and maintenance on?" Eleanor's face hardened instantly. "Julian, don't be boorish. We are in the middle of a celebration. You have plenty of money. You can buy another house. But Caleb needs this house. The Wiltshires need to know their daughter is being taken care of by a man of substance. You're already successful. You don't need to flaunt it like this." "A man of substance?" I laughed, and it sounded like breaking glass. "Caleb has a substance of zero. He hasn't earned a dime in his life. If he wants a $6 million villa, he can do what I did. Work 18 hours a day for a decade and build something." Caleb finally spoke, his voice dripping with an unearned entitlement that made my blood boil. "Come on, Jules. Don't be like that. You've always been the big hero. Why stop now? It's just a house to you. To me and Sienna, it's a future. Don't ruin our night with your ego." The argument that followed was a blur of whispers and sharp glances. The Wiltshires looked uncomfortable, but my parents were relentless. They cornered me in the kitchen afterward, the pretense of the happy family completely gone. "You will sign those papers, Julian," Arthur hissed, pinning me against the counter. "We've already told the Wiltshires it's a done deal. If you back out now, you embarrass this family beyond repair. You make Caleb look like a fraud, and you make us look like liars." "You are liars," I shot back. "You've built this entire marriage on a lie that Caleb is me. Why is it my job to fund his fantasy life?" "Because we have the files, Julian," Eleanor whispered, stepping into the light. Her voice was cold, devoid of any maternal warmth. "We know about the Project Icarus irregularities. We know how you adjusted the data to get that venture capital. One call to the SEC and your precious little company is a crime scene. Is this house worth your freedom? Is it worth your reputation?" I looked at them, the two people who were supposed to protect me, and realized they had been auditing my life for months, looking for a weapon to use against me. They didn't care about me. They only cared about the golden child and the shadow empire they wanted him to rule. "You have 2 weeks," Arthur said, straightened his tie. "The wedding is at the end of the month. We expect the deed to be signed over at the gifting ceremony. Don't make us destroy you, son. We'd much rather keep things in the family." As they walked back into the dining room to rejoin the party, leaving me alone in the dark kitchen, I felt a strange sense of calm. The blackmail was real. The threat was real. But they had made one fatal mistake. They thought I was playing the same game they were. They thought I cared about the house more than I cared about the truth. Before I tell you about the secret they thought they had on me and how I spent those 2 weeks preparing a gift they would never forget, please make sure to like this video and hit that subscribe button. It's the only way to ensure stories like mine don't stay hidden in the shadows. Now, let's talk about the blackmail documents and the trap they were actually walking into. For the next 14 days, my life became a living nightmare. If you've ever had your own parents turn into predators, you know it's not a sudden shift. It's a slow, calculated suffocating. My phone didn't just ring, it screamed with notifications every hour. Arthur and Eleanor had moved beyond polite suggestions. They were now in full-blown tactical warfare mode. The secret they were holding over my head was something they called the Icarus fraud. 10 years ago, when I was just a 21-year-old kid with a laptop and a dream, I had launched a prototype for a decentralized cloud storage system. It was the foundation of Ether systems. My parents had somehow found an old, disgruntled intern from that era, a man I'd fired for gross incompetence, and they had paid him to sign a sworn affidavit. The affidavit claimed that I hadn't built the code myself. It claimed I had stolen the encryption algorithms from a government-funded lab where I'd had a summer internship. In the world of tech and venture capital, an accusation of intellectual property theft from the government is a death sentence. It's not just a lawsuit, it's a federal investigation. It's the kind of scandal that makes investors pull out in 24 hours and turns a multi-million-dollar company into a hollow shell. Arthur sat me down in my own study 3 days after the dinner party. He threw a stack of printed emails on my desk, emails I had never sent, but that were forged with such precision they looked terrifyingly real. "Look at them, Julian," Arthur said, his voice a low, vibrating growl. "These are the logs showing the stolen data transfer. We have the witness. We have the timestamps. We have everything a prosecutor needs to put you away for corporate espionage and fraud. How do you think the Whitshires will react when their successful son-in-law is revealed to be a common thief?" "I built that code from scratch, Dad," I said, my voice cold and hard. "I stayed up for 48 hours straight for 3 months. I have the original notebooks. I have the commit history." "Evidence can be buried, Julian," Eleanor said, appearing in the doorway like a ghost in expensive silk. She walked over and put a hand on my shoulder, but there was no warmth in it. It felt like the weight of a stone. "And a scandal is a scandal regardless of the truth. By the time you prove your innocence, Ether systems will be bankrupt. You'll be broke. And Caleb's marriage will be ruined because of the shame you brought on the family." She leaned in closer, her perfume cloying and sweet. "Why fight us? It's just a house. You have millions. Just give your brother this one win. Let him have the villa. Let him marry Sienna with the dignity he deserves. In exchange, we burn this folder. We send that intern back to the hole he crawled out of. We go back to being a happy family." A happy family. It was the ultimate gaslighting. They were threatening to put me in prison for a crime I didn't commit, all to give my $6 million home to a brother who spent his afternoons playing video games and spending my money. But it wasn't just the house. They started calling my business associates. I got a call from Marcus, my head of operations. "Julian," he said, sounding worried, "your father called the office today. He was asking strange questions about our early compliance filings. He mentioned something about a Project Icarus. Is everything okay?" Then came the concerned messages to my personal friends, the same tactic I'd read about in stories of narcissists. My mother sent a group text to my cousin and my few close friends. "Please pray for Julian. He's going through a very dark time and making some erratic decisions. We're worried his stress is causing him to lose touch with reality. We're trying to help him, but he's pushing us away." I was being isolated. They were building a narrative that I was a criminal and mentally unstable. It was the same pattern I'd seen in those cases where a family decides to harvest a successful member like a crop. They weren't just taking my villa, they were trying to take my identity. For those 2 weeks, I didn't sleep. But I wasn't panicked. I was working. Every time Arthur threatened me, I recorded the conversation. Every time Eleanor sent a manipulative text, I screenshotted it and backed it up to 3 different cloud servers. I hired a private forensic accountant, one who didn't know the Callahan name, to do a deep dive into my own company's founding years. I wanted every receipt, every line of code, and every bank statement verified. But I did something else, too. Something they never expected. I started looking into Arthur's records. My father had been a successful businessman for 40 years, but he had a habit of hiding his losses behind new ventures. I dug into the company he'd supposedly retired from. I dug into the legacy he was so desperate for Caleb to inherit. What I found was a rotting structure. My father wasn't just broke. He was in deep with some very unsavory lenders. The reason he needed Caleb to marry Sienna wasn't just for status, it was for the Whitshire Trust. He needed Caleb to have access to Sienna's dowry and her family's connections so he could funnel money out to pay off his own secret debts. And then I found the biggest secret of all, the one that made the Icarus folder look like a children's book. It was a secret about Caleb's birth, a secret my mother had kept from my father for nearly 30 years. It was the ultimate receipt, the one that would turn my mother's world into a graveyard. As the gifting ceremony approached, I felt a strange sense of peace. My family thought they were holding a gun to my head. They thought they were the ones with the leverage. They saw me walking around the villa with dark circles under my eyes and assumed I was breaking. Arthur would smirk at me over breakfast. "Only 5 days left, Julian. The lawyers have the deed ready for the ceremony. Don't be late to your own defeat." "I'll be there, Dad," I replied, sipping my coffee. I wouldn't miss it for the world. If you've ever sat at a table with people who were actively trying to ruin you, knowing you had the power to destroy them with a single sentence, you know the feeling of cold clarity I had. It wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about survival. Before we get to the gifting party, where 100 people watched me walk toward a podium to hand over my life, please make sure to like this video and subscribe. What would you do if your parents threatened to send you to jail for a house? Would you sign or would you fight? Let me know in the comments. Now, the stage is set for the most expensive wedding gift in California history. The evening of the gifting ceremony arrived like a slow-moving storm. My $6 million Malibu villa was transformed into a stage for my own execution. Valet drivers in crisp uniforms lined the circular driveway, parking the Ferraris, Porsches, and vintage Mercedes of the 100 guests who had been invited to witness the generosity of the Callahan family. The air was filled with the scent of expensive perfume and the salty breeze of the Pacific, but to me, the atmosphere felt poisonous. I stood in my master bedroom, looking at my reflection in the floor-to-ceiling mirror. I wasn't wearing the look of a man who was about to lose everything. I was wearing a tailored charcoal suit that cost more than my brother's first car, and my face was a mask of cold, unreadable calm. In my pocket was a small, encrypted flash drive, my insurance policy. A knock at the door broke my silence. It was my mother, Eleanor. She was wearing a gown of deep emerald silk and diamonds that I had bought for her 60th birthday. She didn't look at me with love. She looked at me like a landlord checking on a tenant she was about to evict. "It's time, Julian," she said, her voice sharp. "The Whitshires are here. Caleb and Sienna are receiving guests in the grand hall. Don't ruin this moment with a long face. Remember what's at stake." "I remember perfectly, Mother," I replied. I followed her down the sweeping glass staircase. The grand hall was packed. Waiters moved through the crowd with silver trays of champagne and beluga caviar. At the center of the room stood Caleb and Sienna. Caleb was wearing a tuxedo, his arm draped around Sienna like she was a trophy he'd won. Sienna was already talking to a group of socialites, pointing at the custom Italian marble floors and saying, "We're thinking of replacing these with white onyx once we move in. The gray is just a bit dated, don't you think?" My father, Arthur, was the center of attention. He was standing with Senator Whitshire, laughing loudly, playing the role of the successful patriarch to perfection. When he saw me, his smile tightened into a predatory grin. He signaled to the band to stop playing and walked over to a small mahogany podium that had been set up near the fireplace. "Ladies and gentlemen, may I have your attention?" Arthur's voice boomed, filling the house I had paid for. The room went silent. 100 pairs of eyes turned toward the front. Tonight is a night of transition. We are here to celebrate the upcoming union of Caleb and Sienna. But as many of you know, the Callahan family believes in strength, legacy, and support. He paused, looking directly at me. The blackmail was hanging in the air between us like a knife. "My eldest son, Julian, has been a pioneer in the tech world. He has seen great success," Arthur continued, his tone dripping with a false, patronizing warmth. "But Julian understands that true success isn't just about what you build for yourself. It's about what you give back to the family." In a gesture that I believe is unprecedented in its generosity, Julian has decided to gift this magnificent Malibu villa to his brother, Caleb, as a wedding present. He wants to ensure that the next generation of Callahans starts their journey in a home worthy of their future. A collective gasp went through the room, followed by a wave of polite applause. I saw Senator Whitshire nod with approval, leaning over to whisper something to his wife about family values. Sienna was beaming, her eyes already scanning the room as if she were mentally tagging every piece of furniture she wanted to throw out. "Julian," Arthur called out, gesturing for me to join him at the podium, "come up here and make it official. The legal documents are ready." I walked toward the podium. Every step felt like a drumbeat. I saw my colleagues from Ether Systems in the crowd, their faces filled with shock and confusion. They knew how much this house meant to me. They knew I wasn't a man who just handed over $6 million for a gesture. On the podium sat the folder, the one that would transfer the deed to Caleb. Arthur leaned in close as I reached him, his breath smelling of expensive scotch. "Sign it, Julian," he whispered, so low only I could hear. "The press is in the back. If you hesitate, the Project Icarus files go live before the dessert is served. Don't be a hero." I picked up the pen. I looked at Caleb, who was standing there with a smug, victorious smirk on his face. He thought he was the golden child who had finally eclipsed his brother. He thought he was taking my sanctuary. I looked at the guests. I looked at the Whitshires. And then I looked at my mother, who was watching me with a cold, expectant intensity. I signed the first page, then the second, then the final deed transfer. The room erupted in applause. Caleb stepped forward, pulling me into a forced brotherly hug that felt like being squeezed by a snake. "Thanks, Jules," he whispered in my ear. "I'll make sure to send you an invite to the housewarming party, if I have room." Sienna hugged me next, her voice a sugary hiss. "It's such a lovely gift, Julian. Don't worry, we'll take much better care of it than you did. You always seemed so lonely here." Arthur took the microphone back, his chest puffed out like a peacock. "It's official. This villa now belongs to Caleb Callahan. Let's raise a glass to the most generous brother in California." I stood back, watching them celebrate. They thought this was my moment of public humiliation. They thought they had successfully blackmailed me into silence and stripped me of my dignity in front of the most powerful people in the state. They were laughing, drinking my wine, and planning their lives in my house. But as I looked at the signed documents sitting on the podium, I felt a surge of adrenaline. They had been so blinded by their greed and their desire to destroy me that they hadn't even read the fine print of the legal structure of the house. They didn't realize that by taking the deed, Caleb hadn't just inherited a villa, he had inherited a financial catastrophe that I had been keeping at bay with my own corporate resources. The Project Icarus secret they thought they had on me was a firecracker compared to the nuclear bomb I was about to drop on their heads. Before I tell you about the moment I took the microphone back, and before I reveal the secret about Caleb's birth that made my mother's face turn into a mask of pure terror, please make sure you've liked this video and subscribed. Have you ever been pushed to your limit by people who thought they were smarter than you? Let me know in the comments. Now, the party is about to take a turn that none of these 100 guests will ever forget. The applause was deafening. Caleb was practically glowing, his chest puffed out as he shook hands with Sienna's father, Senator Whitcher. My mother was wiping away fake tears of joy, and my father, Arthur, had that look of a hunter who had finally cornered his prey. He leaned into the microphone one last time, his voice dripping with victory. To my son Caleb, may this home be the start of a dynasty, and to Julian, thank you for finally putting family first. As he moved to step away from the podium, I stepped forward. I didn't rush. I didn't look angry. I moved with the calm precision of a man who had already seen the end of the movie. I reached out and gently took the microphone from my father's hand. He hesitated for a split second, his eyes narrowing in a silent warning. But he couldn't make a scene in front of the senator and 100 guests. He let go. "Everyone, if I could have just one more minute of your time," I said, my voice echoing through the grand hall, amplified by the high-end sound system I had installed last year. The room settled. The clinking of glasses stopped. My father is right. Tonight is about family, and it's about a gift. But I think there are some things Caleb and his new in-laws need to know about this legacy they've just inherited. I looked at Caleb. He was still smiling, but the smile was starting to look brittle. "Caleb, you wanted to be a man of substance," I continued, walking slowly toward him. "You wanted to live in this Malibu villa, to swim in this pool, and to host these parties. Well, as of 60 seconds ago, you officially became the sole owner of Callahan Luxury Holdings, LLC, the entity that holds the deed to this house. But there's a reason I signed it over so quickly tonight." I paused, letting the silence grow heavy. "See, what my father forgot to mention to you, and what he's been hiding from the Witchers, is that this house isn't just an asset. It's a liability. Over the last 2 years, Dad, you've been funneling your massive losses from your failed real estate ventures through my LLC. You thought I was just being a good son by letting you manage the accounts. But what I was actually doing was letting you build your own gallows." Arthur's face went from smug to a sickly shade of gray. "Julian, that's enough," he hissed, stepping toward me. "No, Dad, it's just the beginning," I said, turning to the crowd. "Caleb, congratulations. With this house, you have also just inherited a $4.2 million balloon mortgage that I took out 30 days ago. You've also inherited the $850,000 in back taxes and the IRS lien that my lawyers just finalized this morning. You see, the papers you just signed didn't just give you the house, they gave you the debt. By tomorrow morning, the banks will be knocking on your door, not mine, and since you've never had a job, I'm curious how you're going to explain that to the senator." The room went dead silent. Senator Whitcher's face turned into a mask of pure ice. He looked at Arthur, then at Caleb, who was staring at the signed folder in his hand as if it were a poisonous snake. "And Dad," I said, turning to Arthur, who was now trembling with a mix of rage and terror, "I know you were counting on Sienna's dowry and the Whitcher Trust to bail you out. I know that's why you pushed this marriage, but I already took the liberty of sending a very detailed folder to the senator's legal team this afternoon. It contains every record of your attempted fraud, every forged signature you used to try and access my corporate accounts, and the full history of the Project Icarus blackmail you tried to use against me." I smiled at him, a cold, thin smile. "The Project Icarus files you have? They're fake, Dad. I knew you were using Eleanor's login to try and hack my servers. I fed you those documents myself. They contain digital trackers that recorded every time you accessed them, every time you shared them, and the exact IP address of the disgruntled intern you tried to bribe. Every conversation we've had for the last 2 weeks, recorded, every threat, documented." My mother, Eleanor, stepped forward, her voice a shrill, desperate shriek. "Julian, how could you do this to your own family? We're your parents." "Parents don't blackmail their children for a house, Eleanor," I said, using her first name for the first time in my life. "And parents don't lie to their husbands for 30 years. That was the knockout blow. Arthur looked at me, confused. "What are you talking about?" I pulled a single sheet of paper from my pocket. "I did a lot of research these past 2 weeks, Dad. I wanted to know why you loved Caleb so much more than me. I thought maybe I was the one who was different. But as it turns out, I'm the only one who shares your blood. I handed the paper to Arthur. It was a DNA paternity test. Caleb isn't your son, Dad, I said, my voice quiet but carrying to every corner of the room. He's the result of that business trip Eleanor took to London 29 years ago with your former rival, Marcus Thorne. Why do you think he has Marcus's eyes? Why do you think he's never looked like a Callahan? Arthur's hand shook so violently the paper fluttered to the floor. He looked at Eleanor. She didn't deny it. She just covered her mouth and started to sob, her face turning pale as her 30-year-old secret was exposed in front of everyone who mattered to her. The reaction was instantaneous. Sienna let go of Caleb's hand as if it were on fire. The senator turned to his wife and said, "We're leaving. Now." The guests, the socialites, the business partners, they all began to scramble for the exits, whispering in shock. The legacy the Callahans had fought so hard for had vanished in 10 minutes of truth. I set the microphone back on the podium. I looked at the 3 people who had tried to destroy me. They were standing in the center of a $6 million villa that they now couldn't afford to keep, surrounded by debts they couldn't pay, and a secret that had shattered their family forever. "I'm moving out tonight," I said to the silence. "Caleb, the keys are on the counter. Good luck with the bank. Before we get to the final resolution and see the final fate of the Callahan family, please make sure you've liked this video and hit that subscribe button. Have you ever seen a secret tear a family apart? Let me know in the comments." We are at the end of the line. The fallout was swift and absolute. Within 48 hours of the gifting ceremony, Senator Witcher's legal team had filed for an emergency annulment on behalf of Sienna. They didn't just walk away. They ran, erasing every trace of Caleb from their social circle and ensuring that the Witcher name was nowhere near the financial radioactive waste the Callahans had become. Caleb, the golden child who had never worked a day in her life, was left standing in the middle of a $6 million villa he couldn't afford to light, much less pay for. He spent 3 days calling my office, first screaming, then begging, then weeping into my assistant's voicemail. I never answered. He eventually lost the house to the bank and now works an entry-level retail job, living in a cramped studio apartment that smells of stale coffee and broken dreams. My father, Arthur, was destroyed by the truth. The discovery that the son he had championed for 30 years wasn't even his, combined with the criminal fraud investigation my evidence triggered, shattered him. He's currently facing multiple counts of wire fraud and embezzlement, with his lawyers telling him to prepare for significant jail time. Eleanor, the woman who once prided herself on being the queen of Malibu socialites, is living in a small one-bedroom apartment on the edge of the city, her country club membership revoked, and her friends pretending they never knew her name. I didn't stay to watch the wreckage. I moved to a quiet estate in Northern California, far from the toxic shadows of Malibu. I realized that for 10 years I had been holding up a family that was already dead. I just didn't want to see the rot. By letting go, I finally found my own freedom. The moral is clear. Be careful who you try to destroy, because the person you're attacking might be the only thing standing between you and the consequences of your own life. My family thought they were taking my house. They didn't realize they were just taking my burdens. Thank you for sticking with me through this story of betrayal and ultimate justice. If you want to see more people get what they truly deserve, make sure you like this video and subscribe to the channel. Have you ever had to walk away from a family that only valued you for what they could take? Let me know in the comments. I read every one. Until next time, stay strong and keep your receipts.